Hey guys, my name is Jonathan Reich. I'm a licensed CPA in the great state of Louisiana. Today we're going to be talking about the ERC moratorium and what it means for businesses. Basically today we're going to cover what the ERC moratorium is, why it came to be, and why it continues to exist in terms of the employee retention tax credit. Over the course of the PowerPoint and this video, we will talk about all the ins and outs of what it means, and if you're a business owner, how it may affect you. Alright, we'll get started with the introduction and then what exactly the ERC moratorium is and the reason the IRS brought it to be. I'll give you a couple run-ins with some ERC mills that I've had as a licensed CPA. We'll talk about the IRS backlogs and processing delays and what to do if you're a business owner who's already filed, but maybe you're not so sure that you actually deserve this credit. We'll talk about how to withdraw from the program, some of the increased IRS audits, and then what to do if you are being audited as somebody who has claimed and been paid out on the ERC. Alright, so let's actually dive into what the ERC moratorium is. The ERC moratorium refers to the temporary suspension of the employee retention credit. Basically, what that means is the IRS is not taking new applications at this time. If you've already filed, your application should be in the queue waiting to be processed if it hasn't already been paid out. But what this did was it basically set it up to where the IRS can work through an immense amount of backlogs. I can give you a perfect example. We applied with a business that I work with in late 2021. And we did not receive funds for our ERC credit, the refundable portion, until February of 2025. So there was just an immense backlog because the IRS wanted to go through, audit, ensure that the funds being paid out were actually legitimate and deserved. And that's what the moratorium did. It kind of gave them a little breathing room and also helped stem the flow of fraud. Understanding the moratorium is critical for strategic planning. If you are in the queue waiting to be paid out, you may be relying on those funds for like your next capital project, or you may have already missed the window, and you may have to look at other tax credits such as PPP or something else to ensure that the funds can be available for your next project. So I mentioned a little bit about the reason for the IRS implementation of the moratorium, and the primary reason was to address fraud associated with the ERC. The ERC was a very generous tax program that was meant to basically stabilize the economy during the years of COVID, but it was also just rife with abuse because I could start a dog walking business that had 6 employees, and I could get my ERC credit for $48,000, and it might take the IRS 4 or 5 years to catch up to me, and they will catch up to you. That's the exact reason that the moratorium was put in place. And by pausing new applications, the IRS can manage the existing claims more effectively, basically kind of working through that backlog. The moratorium was originally slated to end, I believe, at the end of 2023, but it has been prolonged as they continue to work through those backlogs, and that gives the IRS more time to develop clear guidelines for businesses moving forwards in regards to the ERC. Another big reason that the ERC was put into moratorium is because of so-called ERC mills. And what that is basically when the ERC first came out, a lot of business owners were kind of, I guess, lost in the fray on what they could claim, what they couldn't claim, what's a qualified wage, do I qualify, how do I maximize my credit, etc. And so a lot of business owners weren't really comfortable applying for the credit because it was hundreds of thousands of dollars on the lines, and they didn't want to make a mistake. Well, in comes the ERC mills, is what the IRS refers them as. And these are basically pop-up companies that say, hey, we can get you that money. We can go ahead and help you apply for that credit, and we can promise you X amount of dollars. Well, if the company didn't qualify or they didn't actually deserve that much in terms of the credits, the ERC mills would go ahead and claim the credit for them, get the refundable portion, and then they pack up shop and they're long gone. And then in a couple of years, when the IRS kind of works through its backlog and says, wait a minute, This company did not deserve $400,000 of refundable credits. They only deserved $180,000. Well, then the IRS is going to come to the business owner and say, you owe us $220,000 plus penalties plus interest, and that ERC mill is long gone. And some of the telltale signs of dealing with an ERC mill is pressure. They want you to sign quickly without thinking. They often promise these large, exorbitant sums of money, or there's an upfront fee that seems kind of high, but don't worry about that high upfront fee. We're going to get you $500,000. And then lack of transparency. Businesses frequently encountered unclear terms, hidden fees, maybe opaque contracts that were purposefully confusing that lets the ERC mill off the hook, things like that. And so the IRS put the moratorium in, and they are much more heavily looking into applications that were submitted by known ERC mills, and that is one of the primary reasons that the moratorium is continuing. As previously mentioned, the IRS is facing significant delays on the processing of ERC applications. A big reason for the moratorium. I did give the example of applying for an ERC credit back in late 2021 and receiving it 3.5 years later. Now, my case was atypical. Several businesses that I've worked for have received them in a matter of months. That one was a large refund, and it was heavily scrutinized. But this impact on the processing times definitely lends itself to an impact on liquidity. Processing delays can negatively affect a business's cash flow and financial planning if they were expecting that credit. And that is leading to a lot of taxpayers being frustrated because sometimes dealing with the IRS can be opaque. So what does the moratorium mean if you've already filed? Well, if you've already filed, you're in good shape. Business owners should start to reevaluate their submitted ER claims to identify mistakes or misclasses if you have filed and you're not sure if you're actually entitled to that credit. It's pretty easy to withdraw your claim if you believe you were misled by perhaps an ERC mill, or you were misled because you didn't understand the qualifications or what it meant. Because this moratorium means that your application is going to be much more heavily scrutinized than an application that was put in during the height of the pandemic. You can also consult a tax professional. Tax advisors can definitely help provide clarity and eligibility requirements. And then you can stay updated on legislation to see when the moratorium may end, if they're going to extend the filing deadlines for the ERC, stuff like that. If you have already filed, just know that your application is in the works. Like I said, mine took over 3.5 years. But that's, once again, atypical. So if you have already filed, the only thing you can do is hurry up and wait, essentially. But ultimately, if it is legit, you should receive your payment at some point. So what if you were taken advantage of by an ERC mill, or maybe your tax professional just wasn't up to date at the time? The ERC was new, and it was, a big fish on the hook, and there was a rush to basically apply for it as soon as you could. So if you've come to the conclusion that, hey, maybe I wasn't actually entitled to this, I don't want to undergo IRS scrutiny or audits, you can withdraw. It's pretty straightforward. It's a program that there is a program on the IRS's portal that allows businesses to retract their ERC claims. If you need to withdraw, all you have to do is submit a formal request to the IRS, and that initiates a withdrawal process. Now, one thing to consider, though, is if you've already been paid out on that claim, you can no longer withdraw it, obviously. If the IRS comes back and audits you and says, hey, we believe that your claim wasn't up to snuff, you do owe us those funds back, you will have to pay the funds back with interest and maybe a penalty if it was purposefully submitted incorrectly to claim those funds. So, before you withdraw your claim, make sure that it actually was illegitimate. Make sure that you don't actually qualify, because it is a headache to go through with that process, dealing with the IRS, undoing all the work that went into claiming the original credit. But if you do decide that you need to withdraw, it is pretty straightforward and easy to do. So unfortunately, the moratorium has led to increased IRS audits. I've talked a lot about the fraud, the abuse, the ERC mills, the amount of money that may have been squandered or wasted, and that has led to increased audit numbers, partly because the IRS now has the bandwidth and time due to the moratorium. Enforcement actions are being taken against businesses who did submit questionable ERC claims. Those can be anything from paying the credit back, paying a portion of the credit back, paying it back with interest, paying it back with penalties. Some of those penalties can be as high as 75%, or if you committed willful tax fraud, even up to jail time and paying the credit back because essentially you've stolen from the United States government by filing that fraudulent claim. These increased audits, if you're a business who is on shaky ground, that is going to lead to financial risk, and you should prepare your documents to basically be able to answer any questions that the IRS may have during an ERC audit. And essentially, it's going to lead to cash flow issues. It's going to lead to operational instability if you claim this credit and you were not entitled to it and it was a hefty sum. The moratorium is going to allow them to take a deeper look at businesses like that to help ensure that everything that was sent out to businesses during the height of the pandemic was indeed legitimate. All right, unfortunately, you were chosen for an audit due to the moratorium, giving the IRS the bandwidth and capacity that they needed. Now, what do you do? Well, first thing is make sure you got all the records of all the employee wages and related documents for when you originally applied for the ERC. Typically 7 years is what we recommend to have on hand, so for that look back period. You need to make sure you understand the eligibility requirements. There are plenty of other videos out there. That might be the gross receipt decline method, the forced government shutdown method, or anything like that. Make sure that you fall within that eligibility criteria. And then if you're under an audit, it's probably best to engage with a tax professional who specializes in ERCs, especially if you didn't have a tax professional prepare your ERC application and maybe you had an ERC mill do that. They're going to be able to help you walk through the calculation to see what you actually deserved, what you took, and what you may have to pay back to the IRS. All right, wrapping up on the ERC moratorium. Understand that the ERC moratorium was essentially crucial for the IRS to work through their backlog to ensure that timely applications that had already been submitted were processed. And basically they complied with the law at the time that people who took the credit were actually eligible for it, that they were able to take the credit based on mandated criteria, and that there was no illegitimacy. The next steps is going to be to develop a strategy regarding when you may receive your payout if you've already applied. Like I said, mine took 3.5 years, kind of atypical, but it does happen. If you just applied for like the 2021 credit, you could plan for it to be several months out. So all in all, the ERC moratorium is basically a stepping stone for the IRS to ensure that all funds paid out were really deserved by those businesses who are impacted by the pandemic, and it's a great way to ensure that the American taxpayer is not on the hook paying out illegitimate claims, and I think it was definitely necessary. So make sure to plan for that if you are requiring those funds for any capital projects, any payroll needs, or business operations, because it could be a while before you see them.